Hello everyone, this is Chapter 9, Super's Developmental Theory for Counseling 4480. Alright, let's start off with an introduction, lifespan approach, Super's Developmental Theory. So, before we start this, the last two chapters that we covered, which was Holland's Ryasack and also the theory of workforce adjustment or workplace adjustment, were theories that are based or influenced by person and then the environment, right? Who are you as a person? What kind of environment is it? And do they match up together? Now we're going to move into a different theory, or what is another theory that is founded in a different perspective. Okay, so again, we're shifting. They're not all connected. We're moving to other brilliant thinkers who might have different ideas on how career choices are made. Okay, all right, so when you hear the word lifespan and developmental, you have to remember that in psychology, when you hear those words, it means aging from birth to death. Okay, so lifespan approach, Super's developmental theory, when you hear just Super's developmental theory, you know that Super is talking about aging. Okay, it's from, let's say, birth to death. All right, sees career choice as a process rather than an event, incorporating developmental concepts. So here, what they're saying is that career is a long-term thing, process, like, processing through something or doing a step-by-step. Donald Super's developmental theory is one of the most influential vocational theories of the 20th century. So this is actually very, very popular. He died before he finished his last chapter. 14 Theoretical Propositions was published posthumously. Sorry, I don't know how to say that word very well. But that basically means is when a writer or an author gets something published after they have died, that means that their work maybe could have been manipulated by or altered or improved or, not improved, I guess, by other people. The author themselves, the original author, did not have control of how it was going to be published. So maybe let's say Super was like in the middle of editing it, right? And then he died. So which means that he wasn't finished with what his ideas were before it was released. So when we know that, or we hear that, we know that this might not be exactly 100% what he wanted or she wanted or they wanted to have done for people to see. Savikas also updated the theory and combined it with a constructionist perspective, which we'll cover in another chapter. So you'll see that a smart psychologist, an intelligent psychologist who really did like Super, but also had other ideas as well, combined certain things together. In 1953, Super introduced his theory to the Division of Counseling Psychology of the American Psychological Association, the APA. He worked on it until his death in 1994. So he was very passionate about this. All right, hallmarks. So basically, hallmarks is just like highlights. Vocational development is a process, and you need to remember that for this specific theory, okay, of making several decisions, which culminate in vocational choices that represent an implementation of the self-concept. So it sounds like a lot of really hard words. So you break down the words into the meaning, I think it's really easy to understand. So let's repeat that again, okay? Hallmarks. Vocational development is a process of making several decisions. So that means how you choose your career depends on the steps of decisions that you're going to make as you're getting older, let's say, okay? Which culminates in a vocational choice or choices that represent an implementation of the self-concept, which is going to be decided by how you see yourself as a person. Okay, so the career choices that you choose are a process of as you're aging and how you see yourself as you're aging. Okay, vocational choices are successive, which means that they follow one after another, approximations of good match between vocational self and the world of work. Okay, so here, again, it's over a specific period of time, what you think might be a good match with what is going on at that moment. Okay, so the next part is we're going to talk about the different components of this theory. So 3 propositions focus on the developmental contextualism. I know it sounds like a lot of words, which are the process of developing a work identity that occurs within a person's social context. So in psychology, whenever you hear the word context or contextualism, that's talking about the environment that this person is in at that moment. Okay. So, like, like when you hear, let's say, two people fighting, you're going to need to know the context of it. Were they in a boxing match, or were they on the street and someone stole the person's money or something like that? When you understand that it's a boxing match, you're going to go, okay, well, they're fighting. That's fine. But if it's someone who's stealing something, you're like, oh, we need to call the police, right? So we need to understand the context. So these three propositions focus on the growing or aging context. So where are you as you're getting older is going to help determine what is happening with your careers. Okay, there are as the person ages, obviously there's going to be new opportunities that emerge, and then there's going to be certain things that they can no longer do. So imagine a person is really old, like let's say old is 75, right? So they're not going to be able to do a lot of the stuff that a young 20-something-year-old would, right? But at the same time, there's a lot of opportunities because maybe they have learned so much in their 75 years that now they can actually do other types of work, okay? Whereas a person who's like 19 might not understand anything of those stuff. And so then, of course, there are going to be some opportunities and some constraints. Five propositions indicate an underlying belief in the differences among people and among occupations. Since we're made up of various combinations, people have the characteristics appropriate for multiple occupations. No one occupation is only possible fit for an individual, nor does only one person fit a particular occupation. So what this is saying right here is we're made up of a bunch of different value systems, okay? And so because of that, there are different jobs that we might fit really well in. What they're saying here is there's no one perfect job for one person. There might be multiple perfect jobs. And that's what they're saying here, is because it depends on the combination of the values that you have. All right, work satisfaction is predicted to increase proportionately with self-concept implementation and is dependent on the importance of and satisfaction with other life roles. So now we're starting to hear a little bit more of a complex model of theory here, or for vocation. So work satisfaction is how happy are you with your job, right? Is predicted by how you see yourself, which is your self-concept, right? And is also dependent on the importance of satisfaction with other life roles. So remember that this is just one role that you're doing as a worker. You're also going to be a partner to someone, maybe. You might be a parent to someone. There's different roles. You're also going to be a member of the community as well, right? So when those things are all balanced out in a specific way for you, then all the stuff works together to hopefully give you work satisfaction. Super believe that the people hold various roles in their lives that vary in importance across the lifespan. So what that is also saying is, as you are aging, certain things are more important to you at this moment than other things. And then let's say you get older 10 more years, other things might be more important, and then other things will be not as important. So it keeps on shifting at the same time. Some people may find little satisfaction with the worker role, but may be fully satisfied with life or roles in another life, with another life role. So what that is saying is there's only a certain time for some people where being a parent is much more important than their job. Okay. And so, but then that can shift later on as, let's say the child becomes 18 years old and is moving out, then their roles are going to then change again. Okay. So do you see how when we say lifespan or super developmental theory, we're talking a lot about aging? Okay, there are 8 additional propositions discuss development in the self-concept, which is implemented in vocational choices, stages, and work roles. So again, that's just saying that depending on where you are, there are certain things that we'll consider in that time period. Within these propositions, we're talking about self-concept, which is how you see yourself, are formed by vocational preferences and competencies. So how you see yourself depends on how well you think you're doing in your workplace and how well you know the job that you're supposed to do. They change and evolve over time in interactions with situation. So as you work longer in a specific career, you're going to be better at it probably, right? Hopefully. But you might also acquire new responsibilities, and then that might be more challenging. So then that changes everything again. A product of social learning, and they are increasingly stable over the lifespan. So if you keep on staying in a place and doing these things, you're going to get better, most likely, and be aware of it, become wiser, let's say. Okay. And this might be a really good conversation conversation when we talk about the fact that in certain generations, we're like, well, if I'm not happy, I'm going to quit. I'm going to get a new job. And then they do it for a little bit, like, I'm not happy. I'm going to quit and get a new job. And so what happens is they might not actually develop uh, uh, basically like competencies, right? And being able to feel like, okay, I know what I'm doing, because they keep on changing and then they're learning again, and they don't have enough time to really kind of like, age like a fine wine, right? Now let's talk about the life career rainbow schema, which is basically a visual of Super's developmental theory. Okay, so this is a pictorial representation of the intersections of stages and roles, and may be used to clarify various roles for a particular client. So it looks really complicated, but it truly isn't. So left to right is basically a rainbow, right? It's a semicircle. And what that is all the different stages of our lives. And so the numbers right there are basically ages, okay? So you're going to start off with growth, then exploration, establishment, maintenance, and then disengagement. So those are the things that are age-wise, what you're going to do, right? And then the up and down part are all your actual roles that you're going to be doing. So that's going to be a child. You're going to also be a college or a student, not necessarily a college student, but a student. Leisure life, what do you do for fun? And then you're going to be a citizen of that community. You're going to be a worker. You might also be a homemaker, which is someone, who takes care of your home and stuff like that. Well, we all live in homes typically, right? So that means that those are all the life roles that super things are typical of everyday persons. Okay, so we're going to now look at this, and then as we go along with this lecture, just think about this and where you are, right? So if you look at the child part, that's going to be in the first part of the rainbow, right? You can see it goes all the way from the left side, and then it keeps on going, right? And then the next one is the student, and then the next one after is leisure life. But as you can see, as each role emerges, you're going to go forward and closer to the right side, which is closer to death, right? Because you're going to be an adult, then you're going to do those things that an adult is typically expected to do, and then it goes all the way over there. I hope that makes sense. All right, so let's talk about this. Super has 5 distinct stages with a unique developmental task. They're known as maxi cycles. So each of those age ranges that we were talking about earlier, which I'm going to talk about again, are called maxi cycles. These career patterns are determined by a variety of personal and environmental characteristics. So growth is the first one. That is ages 4 to 13. Understanding your interests, your abilities, and your values. That's what typically you're learning about in terms of careers, right? Your interests, your abilities, and your values. Maxi cycle number 2 is exploration. That's between 14 and 24. So imagine, going into middle school or high school and then going to college, right? So you're going to try different roles. You're going to try different experiences, and then gaining work experience at this time period as well, which is where many of you are at right now, okay? The third maxi cycle is establishment, which is about age 25 to age 40, which is when you're going to graduate, let's say typically of college, and then you're going to start to get your first career, and you're going to gain skills and then experience it, have those experiences in the work field. 4 is maintenance or management. So that is now you have a career, you have a job, and you're going to stay at it, hopefully, right? And that's between 45 and 65. You're going to maintain it. You're going to become an expert in this field. You're going to be really good at the performance part, and you have career stability, right? Of course, obviously, this is all ideal. And we'll talk about the fact that the economy and politics and stuff like that does change some of the stuff. And right now in today's lecture, like, we are actually in that, right? But this is just talking about in general. And then the fifth maxi cycle is disengagement, which is when you're about 65 and older, which is when you start to disengage from the career field. So you're transitioning out of the traditional work roles and then retiring. Okay, so that's the rainbow component, right? All right, linear stages and predictable, but not invariant or not never changing. So what that means is it's typical that most of us are going to go through it. And so, that's going to happen. But not everyone progresses through these stages in the same manner or at fixed stages. So not everyone's going to go to puberty, let's say, at age 10. Some of us will do it at age 8 or 9. Some of us will do it at 14 or something like that, right? So what that is saying is that you got to give some room for variance in this. In each transition between stages is characterized by a mini cycle, which is growth, re-exploration, and re-establishment. So if you've ever studied child development, right, or lifespan, you'll notice is that every time a person goes through a specific milestone, they have to figure out whether or not they can move forward, right? And this is what they're saying here is these mini cycles is when there are the changes, we're going to have to go through it, deal with it, and see what happens. And then if we're able to move forward, then we'll move forward. But some of us might get delayed a little bit, right? And that's totally okay as well. And everyone has their own, so we want to pay attention to that as well. We can't just say, oh, your child did not learn how to talk until they were 3 years old, so they're very, very delayed or anything like that. It's just like, this is what happens with this specific person, and that is it, and we'll move forward. All right. Each stage has characteristics, developmental tasks. Again, like we said before, as we're aging, there's certain things that we do as we go along in our age timeline. Successful mastery of these tasks allows people to function effectively in their life roles within that stage and prepares them for the next task. So think about schooling, right? You're going to learn how to read and write first, typically, right? And then we go forward from there. And hopefully that's going to help us for the next and the future of our lives. However, some of us don't learn how to read and write. So then what happens there? There might be a delay, and this is something that we need to be aware of. Okay, successful coping with these requirements of each stage is dependent on a person's career maturity. So once we move on from one to the next step, are they helping us? Yes, they're helping us become ready to start working. Okay, here's an example. So career maturity, the definition here we're talking about is the readiness and the resources to cope with developmental tasks involving both attitudinal factors and cognitive factors. So career maturity is being able to be ready to go into, let's say, do work, focusing on how your attitudes are and how you're thinking at this moment. Okay, your abilities to do those things. And then an example of career adaptability, the readiness of the person to cope with the demands of the environment. So as we're getting older, we're going to move environments as well, right? You might be, let's say, living at home, but then when you go to college, you might be living outside. So that plays a factor, because if there's some instability there, you might get distracted or whatever, and then there might be a slight delay in that as well. So again, how well are you able to adapt from one environment to another as you are getting older or aging? While making a living, people live a life, right? So when you're working, you're not just working, you also have a life that you're living. Getting into relationships, having children, getting married, or whatever it is. So in Super's theory as well, we're talking about all the different roles that each person typically plays. Obviously, some of us will not have some of these things, and that's totally fine. But typical are the child, number one. Number two is the student. Number three is the homemaker. Number four is the worker. Number five is the citizen. So we're talking about living in a community in our society, right? And then number six is having fun, leisure life, doing what you do for fun, for self-care and stuff like that. And here, the definitions that we want to make sure that you know is life space. And that corresponds to the roles that one fulfills at various times in life. So as you're, let's say, a child, what is your life space about? Your life space is probably your parents' home, right? Which is your home as well. But as you get older, you maybe get your own apartment or your own house or whatever it is. Maybe you join the military and then the army or whatever, and that is now your life space. Okay, lifespan, as the stages described earlier, a person lives in the intersection of these two dimensions. So what role you are and where you are environmentally is what they're talking about here. All right, it's important. Vocational choice is an implementation of the self-concept. So right here, just remember that what you choose to do for your work is partly because of how you feel and see yourself, right? Do you think that you're able to do certain things? Then you're going to probably try and get a job in that specific thing, right? If you like it and stuff like that. The self-concept includes the objective and subjective views of the self. So objective here and subjective here is talking about is what are the real skills that you probably have or your abilities, or what are the values that you are very secure with, that we can all see, right? And then subjective is how do we see ourselves as well, Okay, so it's going to be a mixture of of your abilities, but also how you feel about yourself as well. People begin to consider work roles that fit their self concepts, which is shaped by the feedback from the external world. So, how do you see yourself and how do you develop these skills? Probably your parents help you. Your teachers help you with your education, but you're also your employers. They might teach you certain things as well. So all those things also play and lead to different work roles depending on how much they contribute to each of those things. All right, career counselors, you provide clients with objective information about the self. So, as a career counselor, if you're working with a client, you're going to talk about what their interests are from, let's say, taking assessments, their values, and their abilities. Maybe they share those things as well. But also, you need to integrate the client's subjective views of who they are and the roles that they want work to play into their lives. So we also need to know who they are as a person and then mix those things two together. As a career counselor, you're going to be able to see those two things, right? And then talk about those things with your client. All right, Super's theory is refined through the years by various researchers. So again, he did pass away. So these are three that are mentioned in the textbook about who love his work and respect his work and continue to carry this on, right? Richardson, there are private and public spheres of work, market work, and personal care work. So there's different types. So they're expanding it in that way. Hare in 1997 says, we need to incorporate the impact of economic changes on the careers and the barriers due to gender and culture in career development. So the 90s, which is a huge time to talk about feminism and multiculturalism, Hare is saying, the rainbow that Super has is fantastic, but we also have to pay attention to the generation that we're living in. If a lot of the stuff is during a time of war, it's going to be a lot different than a time of peace, right? And so Harriet added that component into it. So it makes it kind of like a third dimension to all of this. And that makes sense because not everyone's going to have a peaceful, idealized, world and stuff like that. Sometimes we're going to live in a place where there's going to be a lot of economic challenges and stuff like that. And let's think about even like AI or technology in general and how that is disrupting the typical, what we have always believed work was like for the last, let's say 100 years or so. All right, Bluestein said that it's a contextual view of the outcomes of career exploration may help broaden our understanding of the ways in which exploratory behavior influences life roles and decisions. So let's see that again. A contextual view of the outcomes of career exploration may help broaden our understanding of the ways in which exploratory behavior influences life roles and decisions. So again, it depends on the environment where we're talking about for this specific person is how we're going to be able to learn about what is going on. How are they able to explore the different types of careers that they might be thinking about? And then how do they make those decisions when that happens? So the context is really important. And that kind of also talks about, the previous psychologist Hare, who was talking about, the economy. School counselors in elementary, middle, and high school levels work one-on-one in small groups and in classrooms to help students develop competencies. So here they're saying is during this time period of this person's life, as they're getting older from elementary to high school, they're going to learn how to explore careers, knowing different types of engineering careers. Before you might say that you want to be an engineer, but what kind are there? There's so many different types of engineers, right? So a school counselor, vocational readiness, person might be able to help them learn about those things, learn more about themselves, interests and your values during this time period. Like, what are you into? Hopefully your teachers and your mentors and stuff like that asked you that as you were growing up, right? And then develop skills to plan and implement a future career. So they might go, oh, that sounds like you want to go to college. So let's look into college exploration, all right? Or, oh, it looks like you're probably going to want to go into trade school. So let's look into that. So that's helping them make a career decision that way. And then this is a link right here. You look at this to a link that kind of just explores what Super's theory is in general. It might be a little bit helpful. For some of you, you might say it's not because we're covering it right now pretty exhaustively. Applying developmental theory. So now that we have learned about Super's theory, how do we actually put this into use with our clients? So a career counselor might ask some of the following things. Number one, about the client's life roles. So where are you right now, right? And then also, what are the multiple roles? Because you can also be a worker and a citizen and a homemaker at the same time and having fun. So you want to ask about all those different things, kind of like a holistic approach to this. Number two, which roles are more important than others? So now we have ranking. We're going to ask them to rank those things because you know some people who love work a lot, right? But you also know people who just love to just not do anything at all. So again, we're going to mix them all together and then understand where this person falls when it comes to their ranking of these different things. Okay. Three, how those life roles have evolved over the work history. So how does it change over the time period, right? Maybe they really love being a leisurelite, which is having fun, but the only way to do that is to have a lot of money. So that means that they need to like work more or get two jobs, right? To make the money to then get into the number one priority, which is having fun. So again, that's what that is talking about. Four, assess the client's life themes. So what is going on at that moment? How do you feel about these things? Five, listen to the client's narrative story. So let's listen to the story that they're telling us about their lives. Six, assess how the client attaches meaning to the various events in their development. So maybe getting married was a really big thing for them, right? So then we're gonna hear about them talking a lot about that, or having children, or whatever it is. Seven, listen to how the client has constructed their career. And then eight, how the self-concept has been implemented in career decisions over time. So how do they see themselves and how did that affect their decision-making when it comes to work? And in the textbook, they also they have questions in box 9.2. What are the client's life themes? What is the client's life structure? What are the client's adaptive coping strategies? So once they are put into a different environment, how do they cope with it, right? Do they panic? Or they're like, I got this, let's do this, this, and this, and let's, keep it calm, right? What are the client's individual style characteristics, such as abilities, interests, and personality? So we're talking now about diversity, right? Some of us have disabilities, some of us are people of color, and we might approach things just differently, right? So we want to hear their individual style characteristics. What are the client's narrative stories? Some of us have gone to prison. Some of us have gone to the military. Some of us have been unhoused or homeless. So all these things might change our stories, right? And that's totally fine. We want to hear about these things and see how they got to where they are today. What is the relative importance of the client's life roles? How does the client's context affect the decisions and developmental process? So what kind of environment affected them? Let's say to decide to go to college or not. The environment might be a family that doesn't believe in going to school, right? Wanting to, let's say, work in a factory or working, in the fields or something like that. Or working in a restaurant or whatever it is. So those things can affect a person's decision to go to college or, get a specific type of job. And how does the client's self-concept influence their vocational choices? So again, how they see themselves and how did that affect it? Because let's say if the entire community that you grew up with says, you are worthless, you might not necessarily feel like you should try to aim for the stars because everyone says that you are not worth anything. Directions and implications for career counseling. So the goals of counseling for clients are, number one, to develop and accept an integrated and adequate picture of themselves in their life roles. So we're hoping that as we're talking to our clients, that they have accepted, they're happy with all the roles that exist for them, but also their workplace as well. Right? You want to test it against reality, so test it against other people, society, because obviously if there's some delusions there, we want to make sure that those things are addressed. All right, and then we're going to convert it into reality by making choices that implement self-concept and lead to a job success and satisfaction, as well as benefit society. So once we see who they are and understand who they are, and then able to find a job that matches up to who they believe they are, they're going to hopefully be contributing members of society, right? Good people within the society, the community that we live in. Hopefully it'll be peaceful because of all of that as well. Yeah. So again, this is what happens when we find a good match. That's what they're saying. All right. So out of Super's theory comes Career Development Assessment and Counseling Model, which is CDAC. And so CDAC has 4 phases of assessments. Okay. So the number 1 is life space and work role salience. Number 2 is career development status and resources or career adaptability. 3, vocational identity, which are values, interests, and abilities. And then 4 is vocational self-concepts and life themes. I know I didn't explain any of this, but we're actually going to go through each one of these in the next couple of slides. So let's just go forward so you can see all 4 of these actually being explained. All right, so before we go forward, I just wanted to say in the previous slide when we were introducing the CDAC is that the CDAC is actually using Super's theory, but also adjusting the trait and factor theory, which is another theory that we talk about in career counseling, and that's how CDAC was formed. So just as a side note, people will find theories that they either have been established that they admire, and then say, you know what, I think this theory might work really well in combination with another one, right? Or I think that if you apply this into this theory, you get this other thing that's pretty interesting as well. So the CDAC is kind of like a combination of the two, super and then trait and factor theory. All right, so let's now go into the 4 different components of CDAC. Life space and work role salience. So right there, it sounds like a lot of scary words, but life space we learned about already in the previous slides, a couple slides ago, at the beginning of this chapter, where basically at the age where you are right now, what is around you? What is the environment around you? And that is your life space, okay? And your life space will be different now than it was maybe when you were a kid. And then it will be different when you're like in your 80s, okay? And then the work role salience. Salience is just a fancy word for importance, okay? So where you are in your environment and how important is work at that time period for you, okay? So you want to explore the importance of work roles to the client in relation to other potential roles as a client's life. So remember, you're going to be multiple things at one time. You can be a child and a student, right? You can be a student and a homemaker and a citizen and a leisureite. So again, it really does depend on who you are and what stage in life you are in. Life structure is the constellation of core and peripheral roles that define a person's life. So like we said before, when we talk to our client, so let's say that they are a student, homemaker, citizen, and leisureite. What are their top priorities? Like, which one is the most important thing for them? Being a student studying, or making a home, right? Or being a community member, or having fun, right? Again, you're going to have a little bit of all of those things at the one time, but we want to know which ones are your priorities. So that's a constellation, basically. A constellation is like, a bunch of stars in the sky. Like, how does it all match up to form who you are as a person? Degree of salience will influence the weight placed on the 3 following assessments. So this one will affect the next 3 parts of this theory, okay? So how important is work, and that will affect the rest of the other things. So the next part is career development status and resources or career adaptability. So this determines which developmental tasks are of concern to that client. So at this time, as you're aging, what are important things that are going on at that moment? What are some of the important things that you need to accomplish during this time period? Follow that by an assessment of the coping resources that they possess to deal with those concerns. So remember, as you're getting older, things change about your life. Let's say that you are moving out of your house, right? So that is a developmental task that is going to be concerning for a 21-year-old, right? So do they have the resources so that they can live on their own, or whatever that they need to do, right? And then the attitude and competencies that the client holds for dealing with specific developmental tasks that they are facing. So how do they feel? What is their attitude towards these changes, right? Are they freaking out and panicking, full of anxiety, full of fear, or are they like really excited and looking really forward to the changes in life? So again, all those things in combination, that's constellation, right, will play a part in deciding what we're going to do as a career. The third part is the vocational identity. So this is the trait and factor part that we talked about, where super kind of like goes into this one and then kind of manipulates it and is influenced by it, right? To get the CDAC theory that we're talking about now. So trait and factor are your values, your abilities, and your interests. So these are pretty like stable stuff. It doesn't necessarily change over time. Assessing the way of the client's way of coping with the world. Okay, so their values will help them see the world and deal with the world, right? Their abilities, what can they do? And also, what are they interested in, Develop a description of these aspects of the client's vocational identity and how it might be expressed in various roles in your life. So again, the different roles are student, homemaker, citizen, and leisureite, right? Typically. Okay, and the last part is vocational self concepts and life themes. So now we're talking about how we see ourselves. Okay, so the focus shifts from the objective, which is the previous one, like your trait and factor, during the previous step, to an assessment of the client's subjective self concept. So we go from what we know are their permanent, typical, stable stuff into who you see yourself as at this moment. So two methods. You can either take a cross-sectional method, which focuses on the client's current self-schema. Okay, so that means right now what is going on, versus a longitudinal method, which is you're going to look at all the different themes that have developed throughout the client's life. So you can do either way, right? When you want to approach this person and how they see themselves, because you can see them how they were when they were younger until who they are now, or how they are right now today. Some of y'all might not care about the person's life back when they were younger. It helps the client identify their career story. So then it might have influence in, or it might not. Like, what are they interested in right now, and then that's their story. So their life theme, career interview style. So you might talk about the role models that they have, maybe their favorite television shows or magazines that they really love, and how that could influence someone. Their leisure activities, maybe they're really into sports, right? And so maybe they want to work in this field as well. Favorite school subjects, that's pretty common, right? People always ask about that. Earliest memories, maybe that could influence something. And then also favorite sayings or mottos that you can say, and that might also influence how you approach life and approach work. After these 4 steps in assessment in the CDAC, alternate between directive and non-directive techniques. So now we're talking about asking them certain types of questions, but also asking them to do certain things as well. Directive and then non-directive. Directive is telling someone to do something. Non-directive is start thinking about what's on your mind at this moment. You want to start off with a non-directive exploration of career concerns, and then you might want to start following that with directive settings of topics for further discussion. So here, maybe we want to just ask them, like, what are you interested in, right? And let them decide. And then we're going to go, oh, well, you took this assessment and you had these certain types of results. Maybe let's look at some of the suggestions that they give us. And then that's more directed, right? And then non-directive clarification of self-concepts and life structure. So you might start talking about, what's going on? How do you see what's, happening in your life? And then a more directive discussion of the assessment results. So then maybe they took a test about their personality, and then we talk about that. Then non-directive discussion on their reactions to the assessment. So how do you feel about the results that you got, right? So again, it goes from back and forth so that it doesn't feel very focused on one only and then not the other, right? We want to have a combination of both objective, which is the results of the assessments, but also the subjective, how you're feeling, how do you see yourself at this time. If you focus on one or the other too much, it could, make it feel like it's imbalanced as opposed to like a mixture of the two. All right, interventions. Goals of developmental theory are achieving a better view of oneself, understanding what is causing the client dissatisfaction at work, and understanding the ways in which they can juggle the multiple roles of child, worker, and parent. Stay at a current job, move to a new field, incorporating possible shifts of roles. Those are all things that your client might want to do, right? So we're going to try and find out by finding out where they are right now in their life, which is, again, Super's developmental theory, right? And what is the context that they are in? What is the environment or their life space that they're in at this moment? And then how does that affect their decision making when it comes to work? All right, the assessment of life space and work role salience. Multiple roles can enrich life or overburden it. So there are different roles that you play, and some of it you might have too many roles at one time and it's hard to balance them all, whereas other people, they have the right mix. Okay, so you want to begin by clarifying the roles and relative salience or relative importance at their point in their life. So you can do this by using the inner role assessment technique by Brown and Brooks. So what they ask you to do as a counselor is ask your client list the life roles in which they currently are involved and estimate the amount of time spent in each of those roles. So we're talking about how much time do you spend on this versus that. Okay, and then from there, what is the most important things? Or what are those most important roles? Rank the life roles using values of the as a basis for ranking. And then the third part is you want to identify the roles that are conflicting with one another. roles that are compensatory with one another, and roles that are complement of one another. So conflict, it might be you really want to have a lot of fun, but you're also a student at the same time. So you're kind of like, you have to do both, right? You want to do both, but it can fight with each other because you can't have fun because you have to study, right? Whereas a job where you just work 9 to 5, a student typically has to study outside of those time periods at school. So it might be conflicting with each other. Compensatory basically means maybe you're lacking in one, and then one basically kind of replaces it. So let's say, for example, you want to be a citizen of your community, but you're not able to because of your physical disability, right? So because of that, then you're not able to participate in community events or whatever, whatever, for example. Or maybe you're someone who is system impacted or been in prison. You're not able to necessarily participate in certain things, right? And then there are complements. So one might help the other. So maybe the job that you really want, by being a student, that role is going to help you with your work role at the same time. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Now let's talk about the assessment of career adaptability. So again, adaptability is how are you able to cope with the environment that you are about to go into, right? Because it's a little bit different. All right, client may be concerned about the exploration stage. So this is the time where they're exploring career fields and stuff like that. Unsure about their age and expected career stage. Should I be further along in my career path? I'm sure we all have thought about that, right? We're like, I'm 24. I should have graduated when I was 21. What am I doing? What's wrong with me? Why am I being delayed? All those ideas and questions that pop up in your head. And it's very normal to have all of those things because we also want to explore who we are, feel good about ourselves, but also want to, be on the path that we hope that we had envisioned for ourselves. So your family may think it's funny that the client is still thinking about what to do. So they might go, shouldn't you already know what to do? And they're teasing you, maybe lovingly, maybe not so lovingly. But this is the time for you to focus on crystallization or making a decision, right? And I think most of you all have pretty much made a decision to be in the helping field, right, as one of your roles. And so that's really great. That means that you've made some decisions in your life. Your first type of resource here is positive attitude towards your career planning. And I hope that you all feel good about your decisions when it comes to it. I welcome you all into this field, into this major or related majors, criminal justice, psychology, and all that other stuff. And, welcome to this world that you are about to get into. All right, your second type of coping resource here is knowledge about oneself and the world of work. So obviously, as you're taking this class, you're learning a little bit more about it, but you're going to probably explore it through internships and other stuff like that as well. So is it appropriate? Is it appropriate to the client's age and experience? We're talking about confidence, ability to talk about negative and positive aspects of a current job, strengths and weaknesses. So it's asking is like, are you ready to be able to be a professional? Right? Do you have the self-esteem? Do you have the education or the competencies to be able to talk about your job in good ways and bad ways? Because we want to be reasonable, right? And also the strengths and weaknesses of your abilities, let's say. The third type of coping resource is decision-making skills. So describe the process that is used to make decisions, such as when you change a job or when you decide to buy a car. What are the decisions that made you decide one way or the other? And then are your decision-making skills truly adequate or inadequate because parents have said something? So are people influencing you, or are you able to do it on your own, right? Not necessarily bad either way, right? But we're hoping that you start to get to know who you are as a person so then you can make these decisions, because your parents are not necessarily going to be around forever. So why not make those decisions on your own? But you can obviously share and be open with your family and be connected with your family and make your own decisions. All right, assessment of vocational identity focuses on the third step, which is integrating information about the client's interests, values and abilities, and personality. So part of this is talking a little bit about trait and factor, I believe, looking into historical information about the client prior to this counseling session, and then interviewing, focusing on the tasks and activities that one does or does not enjoy. So you want to ask some questions about, what are the things that you like or don't like, these factual things. Do you like working outside? Do you like working on a team? All those things are these kind of more concrete, objective descriptors, right? And the last part we're talking about is assessment of occupational self-concepts and life themes. So occupational self-concept is how do you see yourself as a professional in the work world, right? And also where are you in your life at this moment? And are there any patterns or themes that are emerging? So subjective self-concept is explored. So subjective basically means that your perspective of it, like as your individual, right? So how do you see yourself? And from here, we're going to explore that as a team with your counselor, let's say. How they make sense of themselves and the world. So how they see themselves and how do they fit into the world that they are living in, right? We want to hear about those things. And then how does a client describe themselves today as well as throughout their lives? So were they before struggling and now they are much more confident, or are they really anxious right now? We want to hear about all those different feeling words, idea words, so that we can get a sense of who they are, so we can meet them where they are and then work on helping them, let's say, find work. All right, that's the end of this chapter. Bye.